So without further ado, I'm going to ask David to kick off and perhaps address himself to the opening question, which is democracy overrated?
The short answer to the question is no. I was brought up in a political tradition, and so I'm trying to write about now, in which the term democracy was always prefixed by real or bourgeois. Bourgeois democracy was the kind of democracy that we have in the West. Not actually real democracy at all, but just where you were allowed to go to the polls once every 4 or 5 years. Nothing very much was permitted to change, as compared with a vision of real democracy which might exist at some point in the future, but the harbingers of which already did exist in places such as the Soviet Union, Eastern European countries. True, they had made mistakes. True, they occasionally used administrative measures when they should use political ones to deal with dissent. But nevertheless, the varieties of methods that they chose to consult their people were in some ways superior and certainly not inferior to those that we had in the West. That was the political. So any number of excuses could be dreamed up to adduce to why it was that actually our system was not as superior as we like to present it as being, and their system was not as inferior as the bourgeois press, another arm of the bourgeois democracy and so on, were insistent on painting it as being in their kind of crude way. I hardly need to tell you the series of upsets that came along in order to disturb that picture of life right the way up to and culminating in 1989. It's amusing to me, therefore, to see almost the same sets of thoughts being contained in discussions about, let's say, China versus India and so on. That actually the Chinese are better off without a democracy. They're not a state at all. They're something else that don't require a form of democracy. The democracy is not being required in order to be a condition for economic success, and that actually, in any case, there are a whole series of problems to do with our own democratic form. And all I would say is this. There is an unpleasant way in which those states we excuse for not being as democratic as ours, there's an unpleasant habit they seem to have about dealing with such matters as people who disagree, people who want to say something that the state doesn't like, renewal. They seem to have a series of other problems associated with that which are difficult because they're difficult for them to deal with, such as corruption and so on. And finally, just to make the bully point, since we're sitting here in a tent at the moment, the historical moment that we are, one of the things that you did not get people calling for in Tahrir Square was oligarchy. You did not get them saying, please bring in an enlightened oligarchy, that's the system that we would like to see, or you did not see them waving pictures of Hu Jintao and saying China is the country whose way of consulting people we would like to emulate. Is democracy underrated? Ask them in Egypt.
Thank you very much, David.